In 1378, the unthinkable happened. Europe had not won, but the popes and a divided church plunged into chaos. So how did this happen, and will these two men ever reconcile? Hello everyone! Welcome to my channel. Let's get into it. So, where do we even start with this one? We have two popes, Urban VI and Clement VII. But let's start with how they got that far. In 1377, Pope Gregory XI was getting up there in age and had no sons. He had 3 nephews though, and they were all pretty ambitious. The eldest of these, Enguerrand, was made cardinal by Gregory at age 21, and he was the obvious choice to be next in line. However, there was a problem. See, cardinals at the time were not elected by universal suffrage, but rather by the most senior cardinals only. And there were only 7 of those, and 4 of them weren't keen on Enguerrand. So even though he was the most senior cardinal, he didn't have enough votes, so he began bribing the others. Now, normally, the College of Cardinals would meet in a conclave to elect a new pope when the papacy was vacant, but Enguerrand wanted to make things more democratic, so he convinced the cardinals to vote by proxy instead. Yeah, that's right, like a real election. This was basically unheard of at the time, but it was done. So then the cardinals went home and sent back their votes by mail. In the end, Enguerrand won. He took the name Urban VI, and at the age of 25, became the youngest pope in history. Now, you may think that this is where the story ends, but it really doesn't even begin here. Because while Urban might have been the favorite to become the next pope, he was by no means the only one. And who was his main rival? Well, that would be Robert of Geneva, who was the Bishop of Geneva, nephew of Pope Gregory, and also the 3rd most senior cardinal. But here's the thing, Robert didn't receive any of the votes, and so he traveled to Avignon to ask Urban why. And Urban's answer was basically, I don't know, you just weren't very popular, dude. And Robert was like, no way, man. You totally rigged this election. Your plan all along was to become pope yourself. You forced us to vote by proxy so that we could be tricked into voting for you because you paid off the other cardinals. Like, how dare you, bro? And they were like, I mean, yeah. And Robert was furious, so angry that he excommunicated Urban. Now, this alone wouldn't cause us. It wasn't uncommon for high-ranking church officials to excommunicate each other, but Robert kept going. He accused Urban of heresy and said that the election was invalid because Urban had taken bribes. He then called for a new election and even threatened to depose Urban if he did unstep down. Now, mind you, this was quite shocking. Cardinals were taught from an early age that the Pope was infallible. It was basically heresy to question the Pope's authority. And yet here was Robert accusing the Pope of everything under the sun and threatening to dethrone him. How does one come back from this? Well, as it turns out, you can't. And so Urban responded by having Robert arrested and put on trial for heresy. And Robert, being the badass rebel that he was, didn't even show up. He was like, nah, I'm good. And Urban then responded by having him officially deposed and later excommunicating him too. But by now, Robert had enough supporters to declare himself anti, taking the name Clement VII. And honestly, he wasn't a bad leader either. He was super charismatic, and he reached out to the French king, Charles V, who was also at odds with Pope Urban and his Italian allies. Charles gave Clement a royal reception and granted him an annual pension of 25,000 livres. As a result, most of France fell under Clement's authority, and that's kind of a big deal, because France was the most populous country in Europe at the time. Meanwhile, Urban strengthened his alliance with the King of England, Richard II, and the Holy Roman Emperor, Charles IV. Together, they tried to invade France and depose Clement, but they failed. And honestly, so did Urban. His papacy was plagued with corruption scandals. His brother, who he had made a cardinal, died in a jousting accident, which was definitely suspicious. But everybody assumed that he had been poisoned by Urban because he was trying to secure the next papal election for himself. And to top it all off, he had a psychotic episode and chained people in the audience to their seats during a public audience. So in the end, the Catholic world found itself divided between 2 popes, neither of whom was very well liked. So they decided to hold another election to try and fix this mess. In 1389, both popes resigned, supposedly after God appeared to them in a dream and told them to do so. And finally, a conclave was held in 1394, and a new pope was elected, Boniface IX. Sadly, he didn't bring about a golden age for the church. Instead, he continued the tradition of nepotism and simony. Also, his brother was murdered in a botched assassination attempt. But anyways, after all this drama, the church needed to figure out what to do about the 2 former popes. They couldn't exactly let them walk around as deposed popes, so they offered them a deal. Urban would be made Bishop of Ostia, and Clement would be made Bishop of Porto for former popes. That was actually a pretty sweet gig until Urban died in 1398. After all, a pretty generous salary for a guy who previously had all of the power in the Catholic world. And as for Clement XII, he lived a much more turbulent life. He spent the last years of his papacy trying to reclaim the throne of St. Peter. He had troops march on Rome to try and force Boniface to resign, but he was captured and imprisoned by rival Italian state. Eventually, he was released and he returned to France, where he spent his remaining days planning further invasions of Italy, and in the end, He never got his old job back. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is how we ended up with 2 popes. Okay, so now I have to disappoint you. There's no real answer to the question in the title. The reason why I didn't talk about it is because the answer is basically, who cares? This isn't a historical channel, so I'm not going to go into the details of what happened next. But if you want to learn more, feel free to check out the description. What I will say though, is that the Council of Constance ended the schism, deposed all 3 of the aforementioned popes and elected a new one, Martin V. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit that thumbs up button. Also, remember to subscribe because I post videos every single week. If you want to watch more, I would recommend this video on the Black Death. Thank you so much for watching and goodbye.